Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended lifeforms are so amazingly primitive that two of them still think doing a podcast called Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea is a pretty neat idea. These podcasters have, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Actually, this is the solution. Hey, Bryan, what's this?
This is another chapter.
Another chapter of what?
Oh, you bet. This time we're watching on Tubi the Last Chance to See BBC documentary series that was created after Douglas Adams' death.
Yes.
As an anniversary type of event for his having traveled the world with Mark, looking at all of the animals that they chose to go see that were at the brink of extinction.
And some fell over the brink.
They did indeed.
And this, I understand, is the 20th anniversary. So 20 years after the book, they decided to do this.
Right.
And it was very shortly before Douglas's death that he and Mark decided to do this themselves.
That's correct. They mention that in the TV show. At one point, they talk about the whole process, which I know we're going to get into in a few minutes.
Yeah, maybe. If you've got notes on it,
I do.
Great.
I do. Just a little bit. Those are the four. Look, here's my page of notes. I got one page, one whole page.
Okay, I've got a little more than that.
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed watching these 6 episodes.
I found it quite different than the book.
Oh, yes, 100%.
This was a nature program more than a travelogue.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, it reminded me of the Attenborough stuff. It made me think of all the National Geographic specials that have been out there.
Right.
Beautiful cinematography.
Yes.
And long periods of just watching the scenery. So in terms of content and or plot, if you will, our conversation is going to be a little short today, I think, huh?
Yes. Yeah, because we're certainly not going to redo all of the information, but we'll hit some highlights.
Yes, 100%.
So when we were talking about the book and all I could do was read his name, I was saying Mark's name incorrectly.
Okay.
And I was saying Mark Carwardine, but he puts the accent on the second syllable, so he's Carwardine.
Interesting.
He's a photographer, and being photographers ourselves, I'm always sitting there going, but is he any good? And so we do get to see some of his work during this thing, and in fact, he is good.
Yes, he is. He is very good. I was impressed with the photography, and I had to, and probably for you and I both, some of the contortions that he went through to get the images that he wanted were probably the best parts of the show.
Yes. Well, in this first episode, they're talking about or going to look for the Amazonian manatee. And in this episode, they do come across a boa constrictor up in a tree. And he is trying to get a picture of this snake. And he is in a boat. And the boat is just doing these tight circles. And he's being brushed and scraped by branches.
Well, he's in a river and they're on a little speedboat. So, you know, not a speedboat, but a little rowboat kind of thing.
Right.
And it's obviously hard to control the flow of the river.
Right. And he's just trying to park it under a tree. Yeah, that was good, but I could relate to a lot of the stuff he was going through.
Yeah, and I did think it was funny because at that moment you don't actually see it, but much later in the series, they're on a river and you see a picture of the photographer, the actual cameraman,
Right.
doing the videography.
Yes.
And he is holding on to this camera, and it's quite large. I mean, it's probably maybe, 2.5 feet long by maybe a foot wide.
Yes, it was very large.
And he's hanging off the edge of the boat. And then I'm thinking back to this little scene where the two of them are in that little boat and Mark's trying to get a picture and the videographer is trying to photograph Mark the whole time.
And also at the same time, getting some very good footage of the snake Mark's trying to get a single image of. So...
Yep, I think we've been there.
I am not trying to say that doing video is easier, but when you're trying to take just one picture at one time, you get one chance. When you're doing the video, it's much easier to go out of frame, back in frame, out of frame, back in frame. So I'm glad we had both and we weren't just relying on one single picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we got to see all these animals quite well.
Yeah, that it's like stunt photography, I think.
Yes, absolutely. So when they're looking for the manatee, they were told that first you have to find these dolphins.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the dolphins from the book?
The dolphins from the original book? No, I do not.
Yes.
I do not
remember I didn't either, but evidently there are these pink dolphins that kind of hang around the manatees, and if you can find the pink dolphins, then you can hopefully find manatees. And I'm thinking, pink dolphin? There's a pink dolphin? Well, by golly, there's a pink dolphin.
I know. It's really fascinating. And they said that as the dolphin gets more excited or agitated, it becomes darker and pinker.
Yes. Right. So I got blood flowing to the skin. I have no idea what would cause that, but yes, the more agitated it gets, the pinker it gets. And I like the legend. Did you catch the legend?
Yes, where they were talking about, well, I say yes, and now I've forgotten exactly what they said.
The dolphin would take the form of a scholarly gentleman and would ravish the women of the local tribes.
Right. And I love Stephen's response to why they might have thought that this was the legend, because it would explain the presence of all the pink babies.
Yes, the European missionaries kind of spread this legend to explain all these new pink babies that all of a sudden showed up.
Yep, that devilfish.
The devilfish?
Oh, yes. Creating all the pink babies.
Yeah. Anyway, they never saw a wild manatee, so they did have to go and find a couple in captivity. I liked the trek that they made, though, overland into this lake. It almost sounded like the river goes up, and the manatees went into this cove, and then the river goes down, and they're kind of stuck in this area.
Right.
But they couldn't find any in there.
Right. You know, the one thing I found kind of interesting about the manatee situation is under all of the other species that they went out to look for, they defined in some detail how they are different than species that are similar. But in this particular case, I didn't hear them talk about whether the manatee in the Amazonian rivers are any different than a manatee that we see in Florida.
Yeah, they did not specify what made this manatee different than another manatee.
Yep. I thought that was interesting.
I would imagine that the Florida manatees are saltwater fish.
Well, that's true.
Or saltwater mammal, where the manatee in the Amazon River would have to be a freshwater manatee.
Right, except that they are mammals and they're breathing air. So what difference would the water make? I could see that in a fish species, or something like that. But anyway, it was a curiosity that I noted when I was watching this particular episode.
Yes. So poor Stephen has this accident while he is getting off of the boat, and he seriously broke his arm.
Oh, gosh.
So then he's being flown all over and ends up in Miami and has all kinds of plates and pins put into his arm. So he missed seeing this rehabilitated young manatee get released back into the wild.
Right.
And I really liked the way that they try to help protect it by getting the people and the children interested in them.
Yes. That was really nice. They did a bunch of things within the episodes that try to encourage the local people to get more excited about the conservation of these animals.
Yes, they did.
One thing that I wanted to note here was one of the questions that you and I had about how they came up with this list that they chose.
Right.
Because they clearly, in the original book, don't talk about the structure of how they decided what they were going to do.
No.
And they didn't, for that matter, even pick the most endangered species that were out there in the world.
No.
But Mark describes the situation in a little bit of detail. He said, Douglas stuck pins in a map as to where he would like to go.
Right.
And then I stuck pins in a map as to where endangered animals might be in those areas. And then they came up with a compromise. And that was in 1988.
Yeah, we did kind of wonder what was happening. And now we know it was, I want to go to these places.
Exactly.
And find the ones that have animals.
Exactly. I mean, it was, from Douglas's perspective, it was more of a travel log. And from Mark's perspective, he was providing the species lists so that they could make it into this endangered species story.
Yes. So the next animal they're going to go to see in episode number 2 is the northern white rhinoceros.
Mm-hmm.
Well, evidently, civil war and rebel activity in the Congo is really making it difficult to protect them, and they have suffered greatly since Douglas Adams and Mark Carwardine have been there.
Correct. And I don't know whether we talked about, do we know when this was recorded?
This was recorded in 2009.
So, right. They talk a lot about the rebel activity at the Congolese border. Is that right?
Yes.
So that keeps them from going deep into the territory where they expected to find those rhinos.
Right. Too dangerous.
Right. But while they're traveling around just south of where it was too dangerous, they did find the southern white rhino.
Yes.
And here is where they talked with at a little bit of length with an expert in the field, where she described the differences between the southern and the northern white. And I don't know, did we talk about the fact that white is a mistranslation?
Yes, we did mention that last time.
Okay.
It means wide.
Very
Yes.
good, very good.
But it was really great how they showed the mouth.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you could see how wide the mouth was.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a little bit of an explanation on the difference between the black and the white rhino,
Mm-hmm.
with the black rhino having the narrow to pull twigs off of branches versus being a grazing animal like the white rhinos are.
Right. Makes sense. Evolution.
Do you remember the difference that they said between the northern and the southern white rhino?
Yes, they said that the northern white rhino's head was a little bit smaller.
Okay.
And it keeps it more erect, more up in the air, and the body was a little slimmer.
Okay. So very subtle differences.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think Stephen called it northern white rhino was a southern white rhino with a different accent.
Exactly.
When they're going to see this southern white rhino, they're with these guides, and they're being very quiet, and they're being very cautious, and they're told to be very careful,
Right.
and to walk very carefully.
And how aggressive the rhinos are.
And all of a sudden the rhino turns and kind of starts walking right at them. And
you can see the panic in Steven's eyes, can't you?
Yes.
He's nervous.
And eventually they find out that that was a tame rhino.
Yeah, it had been hand raised by the people that were there, and they were just pulling this chain.
But he thought that was it. He thought.
Oh, gosh.
But the southern white rhino was down to about 40 animals, they said, about 100 years ago. And now they number over 17,000.
Amazing.
So they've done a great job, and it's the most prolific rhinoceros that we have right now. The black rhino is now the most endangered because the northern white is officially extinct.
Okay.
And it's very sad because they were going to a sanctuary that they were building in Kenya to house some relocated northern white rhinos. And when they got there, they were taking it down.
Right, because they determined that they wouldn't be able to capture the northern whites, or wouldn't be able to find them.
Right. So they want to go to another area to look for rhinos. And on the way, they stop and they see some chimpanzees, gorillas, elephants. And Stephen has a serious cold this time, and he's unable to get down into the pen and visit with the chimpanzees.
Right.
So he's not having a good trip.
No, not at all. They quarantined him a little bit, but he is able to stand up in a like an observation area and watch the animals interact with Mark.
Yes. So they go off to an area where they are going to relocate some black rhinoceros. And they helped with the relocation and preservation. And so they find them and they tranquilize them. And then they're going to put them in a crate and measure them and tag them and do all the radio transmitter things so they can keep track of them. And so you've got this rhinoceros that weighs, Lord knows, 2,000 pounds.
Yeah.
And you've got to get it into a crate. And it's been knocked out. And they said there's only one way to get a 1-ton rhino into a crate. You have to wake it up.
Oh my gosh.
So here you've got all these people with ropes tied to this unconscious rhinoceros, and they inject him with the thing that reverses the tranquilizer, and he gets up and he runs forward and they slam the door. It was... That is deadly.
No, I know. It was very interesting.
Episode number 3 is about the eye. And this is where they go to Madagascar to see the ugliest lemur in the world.
Oh my gosh. And they weren't lying about that.
No, they weren't. So here Stephen tells this little joke about the only thing that he knows about Madagascar is that it's a children's movie.
Right.
I didn't like that because that means he didn't read Douglas's book. And he's doing a 20-year anniversary expedition to go back to all the places that he went. And I know he did it as a gag.
Right.
Because not everybody knows everything about Madagascar, and you have to treat this like a unique property and not give credit to people for reading the book.
Right.
But... it would have been the same thing if he would have just said, the only thing some people seem to know about Madagascar, not only thing I know about Madagascar. Right. So, like, now I don't believe anything because I know you know what this is all about because you're there.
Absolutely. But, you know, it was interesting. I didn't mention this earlier, but I wondered about the nature of Stephen's relationship with Douglas because he does mention in the first episode that while Mark and Douglas were on their original trip, Stephen was in fact living at Mark's home and handling all his communications and all that kind of thing. So they clearly were very close friends.
Yes.
So I'm sure he did actually, in fact, read the book and
just was playing it up for a
joke, you know?
Yes. So they go back to Nosy Mangabe, where Mark and Douglas went and actually did see an eye. They were unable to find one this time, so they went to a lemur sanctuary.
Right. But while they were there in Nosy Mangabe, Stephen, again, pulled out one of my favorite jokes of the episode,
Okay.
actually of the series here. He is in his tent, and they've got the night vision on, and he is complaining. He says that he misses all of his creature comforts, that he misses his wife and his internet. And then he says,
Right.
wait a minute, did I say that right? No, I don't think I said that right. He says, I miss my Wi-Fi and internet.
Right. Wife? No, it's Wi-Fi.
No. Wi-Fi and the internet. That's right. That's what I miss. Oh gosh. Again, I know it was a pun, but then I consider that wordplay. So,
That wasn't bad.
Skates on the edge.
So when they're in this lemur sanctuary, they're trying to count all of the lemurs. And the only way you can tell if a lemur has been counted is if you mark it in some way.
Right.
So they've got this large syringe full of purple dye that they spray onto and it's harmless dye. This is, just hit the fur somewhere.
Right.
So
Grapefruit
when they see a purple one,
yep.
they know that they've counted that one.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen was abysmal at trying to shoot. And then when he finally did splash some on one of the lemur's tail, they were like, "Oh, good job! Well done!"
Oh man, shooting lemur with a water pistol.
Yes.
Oh man.
But then the second funniest thing of the entire series was this lemur called the Dancing Sifka.
Mm-hmm.
It was hysterical watching this thing run and skip across the roads.
Oh yeah, that was amazing.
It's like, wait up, it really moves like that. That's of all of the different ways it could travel, that is the method that it decided to choose.
Well, yeah, it's immensely interesting when you look at all of the different lemurs that they saw, because just like as you would expect, each one of them has exploited some evolutionary niche, and the other lemurs spend most of their time up in the canopy.
Right.
And obviously for this one to be dancing or hopping as it was across the road, it must have been spending most of its time on the ground.
Right.
It's absolutely fascinating to see the different stages of their evolutionary change.
So in part of their travels, they end up at this village where there's a healing ceremony going on because a woman has been said to be possessed by a spirit. So they're doing some big ritual, and from looking at the woman and looking at the ritual and everything that's going on, I have to believe it was all a performance.
Did you get that same impression? I was thinking to myself, no, I can't be that cynical. I can't be that guy.
Well, I'm that guy.
Uh-huh.
And I think
you think they were just laughing their butts off.
All
when they were
a
doing
big
that.
performance
Mm-hmm.
for the first and only video crew that was ever allowed in this village.
Mm-hmm.
Automatically, they've gone reality TV.
Yeah, exactly. I did get that same impression.
So he talks about some of the traditions and superstitions, and the Ai are bad luck.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're seen, they're killed. So that's another reason that this is a very rare and almost extinct lemur, because people don't like them or want them around.
Right. I mean, when they finally do get to see them, you can understand why that might be the case.
Yes, they get a really good up-close look at this zoo where they're inside I captivity section, and wow, it was...
Yeah, it was something. It's kind of like the face is like a cross between a opossum or a possum, and a rat. Yeah. I mean, it was just kind of
And the big ears.
Gnarly teeth like you'd expect that rabbit to have,
Yeah, yes. And bony fingers
Mm-hmm.
and wiry hair that is
Mm-hmm.
very uneven and patchy.
Mm-hmm.
It's, yeah.
Quite unusual.
So they do a lot of traveling, and one of the places they passed through was called Baobab Alley, which is where all of these baobab trees are.
Man, those scenes, and again, you really, this is one of these shows that no matter what your interest is in Douglas Adams, you don't have to have any knowledge or any experience with him to appreciate all of the things that they did during this journey and all of the videography that they did. And those baobab trees, fascinating, absolutely amazing to see them that way. I don't think I've seen them in other documentaries, but I've never seen them like they showed them there.
So this baobab tree looks like it is upside down.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like where the canopy should be are the roots.
Mm-hmm.
And then the canopy of the tree is buried somewhere underground. Because it's... But evidently the baobab tree, the wood isn't really good for anything. It's not good for building, not good for burning. So all the other trees have been harvested except for those. And so there's only this great big area with those trees left where it was a weird, strange sight.
Yeah, very, very unusual. But then they go on to talk about a gentleman that's there trying to reconstruct the rainforest.
Yes.
By planting thousands of trees and by harvesting multiple types of flora that represent the types of flora that would be in the natural rainforest, and transplanting them, growing them, and trying to create corridors for the animals to go from one virgin rainforest into another.
Right. So the deforestation has made patches of rainforest, and there's no way for the animals to get from one to the next. So they want to build roads of rainforest.
Yes, exactly.
that go from one to the next.
Amazing. It was fascinating to see them attempt that, and to know that it would take 30 years or 40 years, they were thinking, before they would have any appreciable effect for the work that they were actually doing.
Right. And in this episode, we get to hear about another way they were having the local people invest in saving these rainforests, where all of the different villages were given an area of the forest that they were designated to protect. And after a year, they would go and they would be judged as whose area of rainforest has been best protected and revived, and then they win a prize.
Right.
And then I guess I'm imagining that the contest has to just keep continuing year after year.
Right.
But again, you got to get the local people involved.
Right. 100%.
So they were out last day kind of looking for the eyes, and the person that they were with, one of the local experts in the found and knew where there was a recent nest. So during the day, they're looking up at this nest, having no idea if there's an in it.
Right.
So they have to wait until dark to see if they could find one. And then they did. But not just one.
Right.
2. So they were just over the moon.
Right.
Because of that.
And it was exciting to watch, again, having the experience of being photographers. We were clearly appreciating his frustration, Mark's frustration, when he's trying to get the right angle and the right look and all that kind of stuff. And
of an animal that will not hold still for
under
second.
no circumstances. Oh my gosh.
So the next episode is about the Komodo dragon. And going into this episode, I thought, are they going to make us watch a horror circus show?
I know. And what's funny, the next parts of the BBC presentation that we're talking about here do diverge from the books.
Yes.
And like you say, I anticipated this horror scene, and we didn't get that at all.
Not even a little bit. It wasn't even referred to.
No.
So they start by going to Snake Island,
Mm-hmm.
where they see a banded sea snake. It is the second most venomous snake in the world. And their guy just very nonchalantly grabs it by the tail and picks it up and holds it so they can see it. And then, okay, I'm putting it down. And he puts it down and it goes away.
Yeah, that was so weird.
It does, I don't know what, reaffirm everything that they've been saying by why a lot of these animals have gone extinct is because they're not used to predators. They don't have a danger sense.
Right, like, exactly. That snake never reacted or seemed to be under threat. You know, it was calm. I mean,
it was never alarmed.
Close to where his head was, but even that didn't cause it to snap or bite or even open its jaws, for that matter.
No, it's just hanging out.
Yeah, which is a little surprising. I mean, you're not going to pick up a cobra like that.
No.
You know, you're not going to pick up a rattlesnake that way.
No, but, and they have nothing on this when it comes to venom.
Right.
And then they went and they saw some monitor lizards, which were gigantic, but nothing compared to what they said the Komodo dragon was going to be.
Right.
And I found the mud bath scene was a little odd.
Yeah, that was a little bit strange. Yeah, because, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, they were taking advantage of the local mud baths because there's a lot of volcanic activity in the area. So they jump into this sea of mud, get themselves covered head to toe, and then they wander around in the woods for a bit.
Well, before they get out of the mud bath, because of Stephen's suggestion, they decide that they're covered in mud, and Stephen thought they looked like the victims of the Pompeii volcano.
Oh, yes,
so they get into these positions with their hands clawed, like,
Yeah, there you go. Definitely entertainment for TV.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
So I guess we've said this a little bit, but I'm going to reiterate it here, is that Douglas's book was, we're going to see the Komodo dragon. And here's all of the trouble that we got into just trying to get there. And then we finally got there and we saw the dragon.
Right.
So that's why I've always called that a travel log.
Oh, yeah.
This is, we're going to go see the Komodo dragon, but on our way, we're going to stop and we're going to see this animal and 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 this animal. And then we're finally going to get to the Komodo dragon. So it's much, much more of a nature documentary. And as you did point out, there's none of Douglas Adams in this.
No.
There's nothing that you need to know about Douglas Adams to enjoy this program at all.
That's correct. But it was nice, even though there wasn't any Douglas Adams in it, it was nice to hear some of Mark's comments and Stephen's comments about Douglas.
Oh, absolutely.
And about his love of the animals and his devotion to nature. But you were right. That's why I commented earlier. You don't need to know a thing about Douglas Adams to really enjoy this particular series of TV shows.
No. So after the mud bath, they watched and helped with the collection of sea turtle eggs to help protect them and hatch them. And Stephen pointed out that the difference between preservation and poaching is really a fine line.
Exactly. And I thought it was kind of funny because, you know, I've always wondered about that. You know, I don't know how many times you've heard that old adage, you know, whether the sea turtles are working their way across the beach and Or it's a story about starfish or something, where they're always like, well, they're not supposed to all make it, but the person that helps them to the water says, but this one will, So
Right.
you're not sure whether you're helping or hurting at that point, but
But if their numbers are going down, you do need to jumpstart it and
right.
make sure that more of them make it. And so there were a couple of facts that I found interesting. One in particular is that the gender of a sea turtle is decided by the temperature of the egg at incubation.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So a 2-degree difference in temperature decides the male or female, which is like, that is just weird.
Right. Very strange. But it was kind of interesting how they had those little cones on the ground where each of the different hatchlings were, and some of them were in the shade and some of them were in the sun, trying to promote the various genders.
Yes. And then after that, they go and they see an anteater that they call the pangolin.
The pangolin.
Now, this is a great example of good, evil, up, down, left, right. There's always a flip side. There's nothing that's good for everybody. It's like what's good for one is bad for another. And this is pretty much across the board, and we've had all kinds of different conversations about other things. But here, the pangolin is threatened by loss of habitat.
Mm-hmm.
All of the rainforest is being cut down to produce palm oil, which Mark Carwardine said, ironically, is being used in biofuels. So in order to replace hydrogenated oil, they're using palm oil in food. In order to stop using fossil fuels, they're using biofuel, with palm oil becomes part of that.
Right.
And so the rainforests are being cut down so they can grow palm oil. And so there's the good, bad, left, right. So I understand why lots of people say it doesn't matter what you do, because sometimes it doesn't.
No, it doesn't seem like
it really doesn't.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing with the electric cars. I mean, the amount of cobalt that's needed is being expanded tremendously, and they get the cobalt from China, which strip mines the mountains to get it.
Correct. And then, as you have told me before, the local infrastructure could not handle if everybody had to plug in their car.
No, absolutely could not. The power grid would go down in a minute.
Yes. All of a sudden, we're told to not use our air conditioners in the summer. Imagine if we all had to unplug our car.
Oh my gosh. Crazy.
So on that note, also, there was some kind of a law passed, I don't know if it's in Illinois or if it's just the city of Chicago, that no longer allows natural gas in new construction, pushing for electric heat.
Oh, jeez.
So everything is going electric now, and it's going to, I don't know, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
So there's this little spot where they come across this produce stand and they see this fruit that Stephen has been interested, and I don't understand it at all. I don't remember what it was called, but evidently it smells horrible.
Yes.
But tastes great.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, smell and taste are so very intertwined. And I do not know how it is possible, unless the sugar content is just so great that it overpowers whatever creates that smell.
Right. They don't really say, and it's not, I don't remember whether it was the outside of the fruit that they were saying smelled bad, or when they were eating it, did they say the fruit itself smelled bad?
Maybe it was just the rind. That could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they say that there's signs that prevent people from carrying it on the bus or on the train.
Right. Yes.
It smells
you can't
so bad.
Yes. So they're about to go see the Komodo dragon, and just before they do, they're having breakfast, and Steven's reading the newspaper, and he sees a headline about a person being killed by a Komodo dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go see a guy who's in his house recovering from being attacked by a Komodo dragon.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, I know, the poor guy. I mean, his hands was all swollen, and you're like, oh man, it just looked terrible.
So the Komodo dragon is not venomous, but its saliva is full of nasty bacteria, and it also likes to eat rotting animals. So it bites something, the bacteria makes it sick and dies, and then he just like waits a week, and then he goes back and says, "Oh, now my meal has been fermented."
Right. Actually, what they do say is that there's some evidence that the Komodo dragon might in fact be venomous.
Oh, really?
And therefore, yes, therefore it might be the largest venomous animal on the planet. That's the latest research that they're doing.
Oh.
But you're right. It also has that horrible bacteria in its saliva, which causes also continued infections.
Right. So Mark could hardly recognize the area with the dragons from the last time he and Douglas were there.
Yeah, it's so funny. It's funny when they're talking about that because they're leaning back on these sofa-like chairs on this veranda that looks over the beautiful skyline in the back. I mean, it's just...
Right.
they don't look like they're hurting too much at that moment.
No. So they've pretty much not brought him back to not being endangered, but they've leveled off the Komodo dragon, so it's doing okay.
Right.
And so this was more trapping and tagging to keep track of their movements rather than watching the horror circus show like they had in the book.
Which I was grateful for, frankly.
Yes. So episode 5 is about the kakapo. There are no more kakapo on mainland New Zealand.
Yep.
So they decide to find a flightless bird that still exists on the mainland. The kiwi.
Mm-hmm.
When the guide dog finds one and they go and they get it and they pull it out by its feet, I had no idea it was that big of a bird.
I know. It was pretty amazing. It was like maybe between a turkey and a chicken, but pretty big. You know?
I'd say it was the size of the height of a turkey, but skinnier. It wasn't a big meaty bird, skinny, but way bigger than I thought it would be. I just picture some little itty bitty bird.
Yeah, exactly. And what I was surprised the most about is the habitat that it lived in. I mean, this was dense forest.
Yes.
And
impenetrable, I think they called it.
Well, yeah. And not only that, the birds themselves, when they did find them, were like holed up under a thicket bush.
Yes.
I mean, just way impacted in there. And I kind of had to laugh because the guide that they were with was covered with mud in the shots after they got the bird out, and I'm like, oh, the poor guy.
Yes. So on that trip in New Zealand, which they called Middle Earth, they look at a giant bug called a weta. And the name translates as the king of all ugly things. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was a great looking bug.
Oh, yeah.
That was a beautiful bug. It was a monster bug, but it wasn't a scary looking, tarantula-like looking bug.
No, it looked basically like a grasshopper.
Yeah.
But
big grasshopper.
Right. I didn't notice that it had wings, did it?
I couldn't see wings.
No, I don't.
But it had grasshopper-like legs.
Right. It had 6 legs, and it did look a lot like a grasshopper. And it's the one that was in all the sci-fi fiction movies in the 1950s about
yeah,
giant animals and giant people and close-ups of that bug stomping around places.
Yeah, and in that trip they get to meet Peter Jackson.
Yeah, that was wild, wasn't it?
And he was much smaller than I expected.
A small guy loves a big bug.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's funny. Oh, I agree. I was surprised by that. We've heard
For
so much
whatever
about
reason,
him.
every time I've seen him, they must shoot him from a low angle because I thought he was a giant of a man.
Oh yeah. Well, he is in the industry, but he's definitely not in stature.
Right. They get to go see a bird I had never heard of called a black robin,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not biologically related to the robin redbreast, which are all over around here and most people are familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
In 1979 and 80, the population of the black robin was down to 4 birds.
Right.
2 of them female, one of which was a breeding female.
Right.
And one guy is responsible
for bringing them all back.
And now there's up about 200.
Exactly. And it didn't look any I don't want to say spectacular, but it was a simple bird,
Yeah.
in its relative sense.
It was a black bird.
Yeah,
I mean,
little small black bird, like a wren almost. You know?
So now they get to Codfish Island, where the kakapo are protected from predators, and Steven is happy because the research camp will let him digitally connect to the rest of the world.
Yes, it seems to be his one saving grace, right?
Yeah. And this time, since the kakapo are coming back, there was no problem seeing one, especially since they had one raised from a baby that stays right around the camp.
And didn't you get a kick out of it when you first saw it? I mean, when they describe it as a big green parrot, you're like, I mean, you saw the kiwi, and the kiwi looks kind of like a little miniature ostrich, like a little miniature ostrich. But you're like, big green parrot, what would that look like? Well, if you took a parrot and kind of blew it in a balloon, it kind of looked like a parrot with a balloon inside of it.
But when Steven described it as looking old-fashioned, like it's got its sideburns, and it's just like it does. It looks old-fashioned.
It does.
And then came, by far, the funniest scene in the entire series.
Oh my gosh, the poor bastard.
There's the kakapo who hangs around the camp. I guess his name is Sirocco. And he climbed up on the shoulders and the back of Mark's neck and just went to town, flapping his wings and humping his head. And the happy look on his face was not Mark's face, but Sirocco's face.
Mark seemed to be a little devastated by the whole thing.
Yeah, he was doing nothing though to get rid of him.
But the parrot walked away happy.
Yeah.
Talk about your happy ending.
That's right. But conversely, after that, they did locate the first nesting female of the season, and they were very careful and able to get some footage of her. So that was something special for them.
Right. I did think that was funny too, because the kakapo, of course, are one of the reasons that they're so vulnerable is that they don't have that flight response when they encounter danger. So they are generally able to get rather close to these animals. So they put up some sensors around the nest so that they could determine when she was in her nest or when she might be leaving her nest. And they draped a wire, I don't know, a couple 100 yards away and set up a permanent encampment that they were going to stay at until the bird had laid its eggs or hatched its eggs or something like that. And what tickled me was it was like a doorbell, ding dong.
Yes. Yeah. It wasn't like some little subtle beep.
No, it was like ridiculously over the top.
Bing bong, bing bong, bing bong, bing bong. Oh.
I guess they have a sense of humor, even if they are environmentalists, right?
Right. So the last episode was the blue whale.
And I have to say, I was sort of glad the last episode was the blue whale. And primarily because the one thing that I won't call it a criticism, but the one thing that I wasn't too fond of in Douglas's book was his trip to China.
Right.
There was a lot about the environment of China and the politics and the people and that kind of thing. And it was far less about the animals, which of course they never saw when they went there.
Right.
But this was one thing that they kind of discussed. Mark made a point of saying that when it came to this anniversary and going down to see these various animals, they decided to avoid China. Every indication is, of course, that dolphin is extinct.
Right.
And they didn't think they would have the kind of experience that they wanted to have. So instead, they chose the largest mammal on Earth, which is, of course, the blue whale.
Right. So they do this whole episode where they get to see, eventually, spoiler, the blue whale.
Mm-hmm.
And they do get to see gray whales. And they do get to see humpback whales.
Mm-hmm.
And there is not a single reference to the whale of the book.
Yep. And if Douglas had been there, that's all they would have been talking about.
Right.
We might have heard the story of the fluke.
Yeah.
There could have been all kinds of revelations.
But they're, like we have said, you do not need any knowledge of The Hitchhiker's Guide or Douglas Adams to enjoy this program. They didn't even have inside references.
No, you're absolutely correct. It was just two friends of his doing what he wanted to do after he passed.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, I can't believe that while looking at any of the whales, that Stephen didn't go, I wonder if it'll be friends with me. just that. That's all he would have had to say.
You have to slide that in there for the true fans, right?
Yeah, but no, nothing. Nothing.
Uh-huh. Oh my gosh.
So I mentioned the gray whales. That's the first whale that they get to see. So they're breeding in an area that they go to, and it's the middle of the breeding season, and these are friendly, curious whales, so there's no problem finding them.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, when they splash their hands in the water next to the boat, a very tiny boat, mind you,
yes,
for the size of this whale.
Yes.
The whale comes right on over, and it's right next to him, and Stephen's like, I touched it.
Oh, gosh.
So on the way to the blue whales in the Sea of Cortez, they took some mules to see some Cochini Indian rock paintings,
mm-hmm.
which was really interesting, but out of place.
Seemed like it. But I think their only point they were trying to make seemed to be that things changed after humans got involved.
yeah, that could be.
I mean, that was all I got out of that. Although I was kind of interested by those drawings and paintings and such, because they are obviously standing on a relatively recently constructed platform that runs the length of that area where those pictographs are.
Right.
But they are still some, 20, 30 feet away.
Right.
And the drawings themselves seem to be 10, 15, 20 feet above them.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really kind of curious as to how did they put those images up there,
Yes. Yeah, there was nothing to stand on. But who knows what the landscape was like when those were painted.
That's true. There could have been a lot of rockfall there or something like that, that had been removed or eroded away in time. Don't know. Didn't think about that.
So then they go and they see some sea lions. And what I found interesting about the sea lion is that if they are on land and sunning themselves, they're very territorial and very dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in the water with them, they're fun and playful.
Yeah, that was really weird, isn't it?
So absolutely no danger swimming in the ocean with them. But by golly, don't go on the beach.
Right.
And so now they're doing a lot of water travel, obviously, because they're trying to find whales. And evidently Stephen is very drunk and sees this bioluminescent glowing blue algae.
Yeah, I wondered how drunk he was when he's commenting about all that. It was late at night, you know. I mean, they didn't expect to be filming that late.
Yeah, and he did make some kind of comment about how it's not just his imagination because the camera caught it too.
Oh gosh. But these scenes that they have on the water are some of the prettiest ones in the all of these episodes.
Yes.
They're in and out of that water, and it just looks like so much fun to me, you know?
Yep. And they're down in Baja, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so just south of San Diego off the coast of Mexico, the Baja, California area.
And they jumped in to try to measure one of these whales in part of the episode, and I'm thinking to myself,
right,
how in the world are they going to keep up with them? I'm losing my breath just watching them.
Yes.
Oh, amazing.
So how do you measure them? Well, you jump out and you measure it. How do you measure the dorsal fin? You hold up this stick and you...
Oh, fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. So they talk about an area over there in Baja that has an invasive squid that, due to lack of predators, is going to just outnumber all predators very quickly. And the conservationist or the ecologist or whatever his official title is was a little bit warning that this is going to be the next wildfire, he called it.
Right. The reason that the squid became so prolific is because of the devastation to the shark population. The sharks have been decimated in that area.
Right. So no sharks to eat the squid. The squid are now top of the food chain.
But they do look nasty. Squid,
oh
man, they look scary with the little bitey claw, the bitey mouth.
Beak.
Yeah. And it's prehensile. I mean, they show that at one point it's moving around, and they're oh my gosh. I don't think I want to be in the water with a squid on me.
No. And they got spines on their tentacles too. Mm-hmm. Not just suction cups. Right. Spines that dig in. Mm-hmm. So while searching for the blue whale, they do find some humpback whales. Mm-hmm. And they use an underwater microphone to listen to the humpback whale song.
Yes.
And it's basically what you would hear on every Nature Sound CD.
And Star Trek movie.
Yes. Yes. And they stop off at some small island and they see some fossilized whale bone, which was, they had rib and they had vertebrae, and that was pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So finally, it's like we're going to look for these blue whales, and using a plane owned by a pilot that Mark is friends with, they're locating some blue whale, and then they set off to those coordinates in a boat, and the plane went back up and would circle over where the whale was, so the boat could just find them. And they found 2 blue whales swimming together. One was a fluker. Mm-hmm. So they had a lot of images of these whales, and it was really fantastic.
Right. And that's one of the things that I learned when I went to Alaska is that the breaching of the whale that dives down and the fluke comes up, is not as common a sight as you imagine. I mean, every nature show you've ever seen, they've shown that, but it doesn't. It's not as common as they make it out to seem.
No, it's fluke.
Mm-hmm. Hey, wait a minute. That sounded awful close to a pun.
Maybe.
I have to say, Jeff, I really enjoyed watching these programs. The cinematography was fantastic. The still shots that Mark was able to produce in conjunction with the different animals that they saw, breathtaking. Yes. I highly recommend this series for anybody interested in nature, and I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. So did I. If you've not seen it, check it out. You can watch it with anybody in the family. Mm-hmm. There's nobody that it would be an offense to, and it is done very, very well.
What are we talking about next, Jeff?
Well, I think the next thing we're going to do is the collection of works, I guess, of Douglas Adams in the book called The Salmon of Doubt.
Great. Sounds interesting. I've got my copy right here that's given to me by my parents in June of 2002.
Okay. So probably when it was first edition.
I believe it is a first edition because they signed it and everything. Knowing how much I enjoyed Douglas Adams, they found this and bought it for me. So,
and because they couldn't get Douglas's signature,
right?
They signed it.
Not at this point.
So,
although all you have to do now is ask AI, and I'm sure somebody will get it.
Absolutely, yeah, that's getting ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we know what we're doing next time, I have to say that this is the end.
Looking at all of the animals that they chose to go see that were at the brink of distinction. Oh my gosh, my brain doesn't work.
Thank you for listening to this. A new episode is released on the first Thursday of every month. A special thank you goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettynneatidea.buzzsprout.com. While there, you can find links to all of my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can contact us via email at digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook at Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. You can message us on Twitter, or should I say X, at Watches Idea, and our Instagram is Watches Idea Podcast.
This has been a Froods for Thought production.